case you don't know me, Oshi Nathan Walden. It's an incredible blessing to be able to worship with you guys today. One of my favorite things is worshiping in a different language. Even if it's hard for me to participate. I know that one day I'll be able to worship with you guys in Chinese and understand it. I'd like to start off introducing you to my family. Hang on. I'm trying to go back to the picture here. There it is. You should be able to recognize me. Then my wife, Liana, who's sitting right here. On Friday, we celebrated our 11th anniversary. Which is a big accomplishment for her. And then our oldest is named Gabriel, wearing blue. And he actually just turned 5 on Thursday. And then our daughter is in the middle, Selah. And then our youngest, I'm holding, his name is Haziah. Every family is really special and really unique. And, whether it's the interactions that we have with each other, or the way we love each other and fight, it's really special. One of the things that makes our family special is that Haziah is adopted. When we meet families on the playground, sometimes they think funny things. Someone once told me they thought my wife and I were Sicilian. And Zaya had just spent a lot of time outside. And Haziah had spent a lot of time outside. And that's why his skin color was different from mine. But Zaya was adopted from India. And there's a lot of reasons why we chose to do that. And the story on how it happened is long and complex. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, well, go ahead and translate that. I'd like to talk about how our relationship with God mirrors adoption. It's one of the most common illustrations the Bible uses. An example is in, I'm trying to get this. Can I get a slide moved? I'm not sure if I'm hitting the wrong button on this. Oh, there it is. An example is in John 1:12. To all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God.
凡接待他的，就是称他名的人，他就赐他们权柄做神的儿女。
This is adoption language.
这就是一个关于领养的一个语言。
Gabriel and Selah did not become my children, they were born into it.
Gabriel 和 Sarah 就是我的两个大一点的孩子，他们并不是说某一天成为了我的孩子，他们一出生，他们一直就是我的孩子。
But Zaya was not originally my child.
但是 Zaya 刚起初生下来的时候，他并不是我的孩子，
And he became my son.
他是成为了我的孩子。
And that is the language that's used in this verse.
这就是我们在这个经文里面看得到的。
Another verse is Galatians 4:4 through 5.
接下来我们要分享的经文是加拉太书4章4到5节。
But when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship.
机制时候满足，神就差遣他的儿子，由于女子所生，且生在律法以下，要把律法以下的人都赎出来，叫我们得着儿子的名分。
God's plan, the gospel, culminates in our adoption.
所以神的计划和神的这个做工，都是在我们这个反映出在这个领养的过程当中。
And then in Ephesians 1:5, we see it says, he predestined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will.
另外要分享的是以弗所书的1章5节，又因爱我们，就按着自己旨意所喜悦的，预定我们借着耶稣基督得儿子的名分。
And so we see this as a common theme in the Bible.
所以我们看到在圣经当中，其实经常会有这样的经文。
And so I'd like to go through 3 different stories with us today.
今天我想要讲3个不同的故事。
We can talk about the Old Testament story of a man named Moses,
在旧约当中关于摩西的故事，
and then my son's adoption story,
我的小儿子的领养的故事，
which I'll also refer to as our family's adoption story.
就是我们家里的这个领养的故事。
And then I'm going to talk about our adoption stories with God.
然后我要讲到就是上帝来收养我们的故事。
And I'll refer to that as our spiritual adoption stories.
我想把它就是看成是一个灵里面的一个领养。
So I'd like to take you guys back to about 5 years ago when Leon and I decided to adopt.
我想先就是回到5年之前，我和李安娜刚刚开始有这个就是收养一个孩子的念头。
We Googled, how do you adopt?
我们在网上在 Google 上面找怎么去收养。
And that led to us getting connected with an adoption agency.
然后呢，这个搜索的过程呢，让我们就是跟一个领养的机构建立了一个关系。
And that agency gave us a social worker.
然后他们就是介绍了一个社工给我们。
And this social worker was going to help us through every stage of our adoption journey.
这位社工呢，他会在我们整个领养的过程呢，一直的跟我们就是一起来工作。
I remember our first call with her.
然后我记得我们第一次跟他就是接到他的电话，
She said, Nathan, Liana, I'm excited for your adoption story to mirror Jesus' relationship with his church.
我很高兴，就是说你们的这个领养的行为能够反映出这个福音的那个大能。
But you need to understand
但是你们同样也要知道的是，
that your adoption story starts with a tragedy.
你们领养的这个事情，这个故事是从一个悲剧开始的。
Your adoption story starts with a tragedy.
你们领养的故事是从悲剧开始的。
Adoption stories start with tragedy.
我再重复一遍，就是这个领养的这个事情
We'll start with looking at this in the book of Exodus.
我们在出埃及记当中可以看到这个经文。
Now, if you aren't familiar with the Old Testament,
也在这个旧约当中有讲到这个故事。
there's a man named Moses who's probably the most significant character in the Old Testament.
圣经当中有一位摩西，那可能是我们整本圣经当中非常非常具有意义的一个人物。
He writes the first 5 books of the Old Testament,
在旧约当中出埃及记当中有讲到他的故事。
and as well, he guides the Israelite people through the most significant event in their history.
摩西呢，他是那位带领以色列人做出了一个重大的以色列的一个重大的一个行为，出埃及记的这个人物，
Known as the Exodus from Egypt.
也就是我们说的从埃及逃离。
So we are going to start off his story from when he was a child, starting in Exodus 1, verse 15.
摩西的故事呢，是从出埃及记的第1章15到16节开始的。
The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew woman during childbirth in the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. If he is a girl, let her live.
在出埃及记1章15节、16节当中有在希伯来有2个接生婆，然后一名叫施夫拉，一名叫普阿。埃及王对他们说呢：“你们在以希伯来妇女接生的时候，看他们临盆的时候，若是男孩就把他杀了；若是女孩呢，就留他存活。”
I'm going to skip a couple verses and tell you that his order does not happen.
所以
Skip a couple verses and tell you his order does not
我
happen.
们在出埃及记15到16章再往下走，看看发生了什么事情。
And if we come back in verse 22,
在第22节当中。
says this: Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: Every Hebrew boy that is to be born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live.
法老当时吩咐他的民众说：“以色列人所生的男孩，你们要丢在河里；一切的女孩，你们要存留她的性命。”
Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months.
有一个利未家的人娶了一个利未的女子为妻，那女人怀孕，生了一个儿子，见他俊美呢，就藏了他3个月。
But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile.
后来呢，不能再藏的时候呢，就取了一个蒲草箱，抹上石油漆和石油，将孩子放在箱中，搁在河边的芦荻中。
Here we see Moses' adoption story start with a tragedy.
我们从这个故事当中可以看到，摩西的这个收养的故事也是从一个悲剧开始的。
The Israelite people are enslaved to the Egyptians,
以色列人当时在埃及为奴，
and the king calls for a genocide.
然后简直其实就是要面临一个种族灭绝的一个悲剧。
In that, Moses and his family are needing to hide.
所以摩西和他的家人就是那个时候要躲藏。
Moses' adoption story starts with a tragedy.
所以摩西的这个收养的故事呢，就是从一个悲剧开始。
Zayah's adoption story also starts with a tragedy.
我们家的扎耶尔，他的领养的故事其实也是从一个悲剧开始的。
When he was a few days old, he was found abandoned in Calcutta.
扎耶尔在大概几天大的时候，他就被人遗弃了，在印度的那个加尔各答。
If you can imagine, those of you who are parents and your children at a few days old, and how much they need you.
你们就是有过照顾新生儿的经验的父母都应该知道，对于一个刚刚出生的婴儿来说，他是多么的脆弱。
Then you can understand how tragic this is.
你们也知道，就是可以理解，这是多么的一个有悲剧性质的事情。
The most common question I get is, do you know anything about his parents?
有很多时候我们知道我们就是可能会遗弃，遭父母遗弃。
And all we can ever say is, there's nothing for us to know. All we can tell them is, there's nothing for us to know.
就是我们能说的，就是说我们也不知道为什么会发生这样的事情。
Zaya's adoption story starts with a tragedy.
我的孩子 Zaya 他的这个领养的故事也是从悲剧开始的。
I'd like to pause for a moment and address one thing.
想要就是在这里停顿一下，来讲一件事情。
First, there may be some parents here who have given up a child for adoption.
有时候有一些父母他们会把自己的孩子送出去被人家领养。
And while I'm going to maintain that it's a tragedy, it doesn't mean it's not the right decision.
我想说的是，好像是一个悲剧的故事，但是呢，并不一定就是会有这样的一个结果。
As we'll see with Moses' story, he does end up getting adopted, and it is the right decision.
比如说摩西他的被领养的故事就是这样的一个事情。
And while their method breaks my heart, I don't know if that was the right decision for Zaya's parents.
其实当我想到Zaya 的父母，他的亲生父母就是遗弃他的时候，我不知道是为什么，我心里会很忧伤。
I'd also like to share that children like Zaya are why Mother Teresa started her ministry in Calcutta. Children like Zaya are why Mother Teresa started her ministry in Calcutta.
OK，就是我想要分享的就是说，正是因为有很多像 Zaya 这样的孩子，所以我们都熟知的这个特蕾莎修女就在印度的这个加尔各答，就是建立了这样的一些孤儿院的机构。
Which Calcutta is where I mentioned earlier, where Zaya is actually from.
我真的也不知道，就是加尔各答这个地方，它就是应该是我的这个孩子 Zaya 他的出生的地方。
In 2023, there were more than 5,500 children in India who are orphaned and abandoned.
光是在2023年这一年，在印度就有差不多5500个孩子被遗弃，或者是被遗弃。
And worldwide, there are over 140 million children who are up for adoption.
全世界的范围来说呢，有1.4亿的孩子是在等候领养。
And every one of their stories starts with a tragedy.
我相信每一个这个孩子，他们的故事都是从一个悲剧开始的。
Our spiritual adoption stories start with tragedy.
同样的，我们每一个人，我们在灵里的领养的故事，也是从悲剧开始的。
Sometimes it's something that happens to us.
有时候是因为发生在我们生命当中的一些事情。
Sometimes it's something that is all because of us.
有时候就是因为我们自己自身的原因。
But ultimately, every adoption story starts with tragedy.
但是总的来说，每一个领养的故事都是从悲剧开始。
I have a friend of mine who grew up in a culture where it was acceptable for a man to cheat on his wife.
我有一个朋友，他所生长的那个文化的氛围里面呢，是男人是可以多个老婆的。
But if it was the other way, it was a death sentence for the woman.
但是呢，如果女人犯了这样事情的话，是要被处死的。
When his mom was found to be having an affair,
他的妈妈刚好就是有了个外遇。
his father told him, "The court will be softer on you than me."
他的爸爸居然对他说：“法院，如果你犯了罪，法院对你的判决，因为你年幼，对你的判决会比对我的要轻。”
And he gave him a gun and told him to go kill his mother.
他爸爸给他一把枪，让他去把他的妈妈杀了。
My friend did not do that.
当然，我的朋友没有这样
She's still alive and well.
她今天还活着呢，她妈妈也活着。
But later on, his religion told him God is like a father.
后来，我这个朋友他们的宗教告诉他，神就像父亲一样。
And he said, I don't want anything to do with that.
他说：“我不想要有这样的父亲。”
His adoption story started with a tragedy.
所以他的这个被领养的故事呢，也是从一个悲剧开始的。
You may be able to relate to a story like that.
你可能就是也会有一些你自身的这些故事可以分享。
Where someone misrepresented God to you.
有些人可能给着你宣讲一些假神的这种事情。
Or it may be that your adoption story starts with the effects of sin in your life.
也有可能你的这个领养的这个故事，先从你在生命当中犯的罪开始。
Our sinful actions, our failures, and our letdowns lead to this tragedy.
很多时候我们的失败会把我们带向这样的悲剧。
In James 1:14 and 15, it says, Each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death.
雅各书1章14到15节说：“但个人被试探，乃是被自己的私欲牵引诱惑的。私欲既怀了胎，就生出罪来；罪既长成，就生出死来。”
In our lives, we sometimes feel pressure to earn our way to heaven,
有很多时候，我们生命当中充满了压力，
or we don't know how to get to God.
我不知道怎么去到上帝的面前。
We experience church hurt.
有时候甚至是在教会里面受到一些伤害，
Or sometimes we buy into a lie that tells us that we can find joy and happiness apart from Christ.
有时候是我们真的是相信有这样的谎言，我们在除了神以外的地方可以找到喜乐和平安。
And we fill our lives with money, possessions, friends and family relationships, accomplishments, lifestyle success, and more.
我们让我们的生命当中充斥了金钱、财物，我们跟人和人之间的关系，我们和朋友的友谊。
Some of these aren't sins directly,
有一些它本身就是带领我们去犯罪的，
but all of these are things that when we put them before God become idols.
但是另外一些事情呢，就是说，当我们把它视为比神更重要的时候呢，我们就是
And
对
then,
立的偶像崇拜，
and then become sins.
然后就生出罪来。
Our spiritual adoption stories start with tragedy.
我们自己在灵里被领养、被收养的这个过程，也是从悲剧开始的。
The good news starts after we realize that God does not leave us there.
但是好的消息是，神他一直都在那里。
God intervenes and a miracle begins and the story changes.
当神真正介入的时候呢，神迹就发生了，然后我们的这个事情就改变了。
Let's continue in Moses' story in Exodus.
我想再继续接着讲摩西在出埃及记中的故事。
Starting in verse 3, it says, But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. She then placed the child in it and put it along the reeds along the bank of the Nile.
OK 就是继续讲摩西的故事，是他被放在那个箱子里面，然后搁在河流的泥当中。
His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him.
他的姐姐在远远的地方站着，然后看看发生什么事情。
Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the river bank.
刚刚好法老的女儿去河边那里洗澡，她的使女也一起在河边走。
She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it.
他看到那个篮子在炉子里面，然后就把他那个使女拿来打开了篮子。
She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying. She felt sorry for them. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said.
打开了篮子，看到孩子，那母亲那时候刚好在哭法老女儿说：“这是一个希伯来人的孩子。”
I see here 3 miracles at least that happened.
我们在这个故事当中至少看到有3个神迹发生。
The first is that Moses isn't caught.
第一个就是说，摩西居然没有被发现之前，
Pharaoh is commanding that the children are drowned in the Nile.
很多很多的那个孩子都已经被在尼罗河里面被浸死了。
And I don't know why Moses' parents thought the right place to hide him then was the Nile.
我不知道为什么摩西的妈妈居然选了把他藏在尼罗河旁边的芦苇叶。
So I'm going to call it a miracle that they weren't found.
所以我想说，这真的是一个神迹，因为他居然没有被找到。
The second miracle is kind of the opposite of that. It's that they were found by Pharaoh's daughter.
可是第二个神迹我想说的是，他被找到的时候，居然找到他的是法老的女儿。
I'm really not sure if Moses is hidden well or not.
真的不知道摩西被藏的是好还是不好。
But that brings us to the third miracle, and that is Pharaoh's daughter has compassion on him.
然后进而呢带出了第3个神迹，就是法老的女儿居然对他有了怜悯心。
This is the daughter of the man who ordered for the children to die.
我们都知道法老的女儿是他的爸爸是下了这样一个命令，要杀掉所有的这个婴儿。
This is probably the last person you want to find Moses.
我们可能会认为谁找到摩西都好过让法老的女儿找到。
But when Pharaoh's daughter sees him, she immediately knows he's a Hebrew.
当法老的女儿看到摩西的时候，她当下马上知道这是一个希伯来人的孩子，
She immediately knows he's a slave.
她马上就对他起了怜悯的心。
And she immediately knows that he is sentenced to die. She immediately knows he's sentenced to die.
法老的女儿就是说看到摩西以后，她马上就知道这个孩子是不能够被存留的。
But she has compassion on him.
可是她还是对他起了怜悯的心。
God intervenes and changes Moses' story.
因为神的介入改变了摩西的这个生活和故事。
Isaiah's story has 2 miracles that we know of.
我的孩子 Zaya， 他的这个领养故事也是有2个神迹出现的。
The first involves that he lived.
第一个神迹是他居然就是那几天被遗弃的时候，他活下来。
He was found by some random passersby.
他是被一个陌生的一个路过的路人发现的，
And taken to a hospital,
把他送到医院里，
which gave him to an orphanage,
然后再把他转送到了一个孤儿院，
which then put him in the adoption system.
然后他的名字就上了这个领养的名单。
We don't know how long he was on his own,
我们真的也不知道他到底被抛弃了多久、多长时间，
or many of the details of how he was saved.
也不知道就是说他怎么样的就是被获救了这种细节。
But we know that God was faithful in that.
可是我们真的知道神就在这里做工。
In Psalm 27, verse 10, it says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me."
在诗篇，
Oh, you're good. It's also up there.
好吧，那我就不念了。
Yeah, I just got it. The Lord will receive me.
神会接待我。
The second miracle involves Liana and I pursuing the adoption.
第2个神迹我想分享的就是说，我跟我的太太迪安娜，我们想要去做这件事情，想要去领养这个孩子。
The adoption process is not easy.
整个领养的过程是非常不容易的。
took 3 years. It took 3 years.
差不多3年，
Lots of difficult and vulnerable conversations.
有很多的一些就是困难，也有很多我们有时候灰心丧气的一些对话。
Several times where we needed something, but we had no clue how to do it or where to find it.
有一些时候，他们问我们要一些文件或者其他东西，我们根本都不知道去哪里找，
A whole lot of money
非常不容易。
and a lot of waiting and praying. A lot of waiting and praying.
然后呢，我们还要就是花很长的时间，我们等待，然后祷告。
The only way we could have gotten through all of it was with God providing a miracle.
真正让我们能够带领我们能够经历这些事情，带我们走到现在的话，就是神的供应和神的应许。
God intervened and changed Zai's story.
神的介入是真的是可以改变生命的。
Our spiritual adoption stories also involve a miracle.
我们灵里的这个收养的这个过程也是有神迹出现的。
I'd like to share a story of a friend of mine named Pierre.
我的教会有一个朋友叫皮埃尔，
He grew up Jehovah's Witness.
他是就是在耶和华见证人的这个教会的背景长大的。
And found that it did not provide him answers.
他觉得在他的那个所信的那个宗教里面，他找不到很多问题的答案。
One day he walked into a random church
有一次他走进了一个就随意的走进了一个教会，
and met a student named Matthew,
他就是正好碰到了一个叫 Matthew 的学生，
who happened to go to his school,
正好要就是在那个学校上学，
his college, his university.
然后他就
His university.
就是去带他去他那个大学。
Through Matthew, he started studying the Bible regularly.
然后通过这个朋友 Matthew 这个皮埃尔呢，他就是去开始学习圣经。
Matthew tricked him into going on a retreat one time.
有一次 Matthew 把他连哄带骗的呢，让他去了一个退休会。
As well, he started finding answers on YouTube to some of his questions.
并且呢，皮埃尔他本人也很追求，他开始在 YouTube 上面找一些很多问题的答案。
He followed a man named Cliff Knechtley,
他在 YouTube 上 follow 就是看一个人的那个 YouTube 上的视频。
If you were in InterVarsity in the 80s, you might be familiar with him.
你们可能如果听到过这个的话，这个人的名字的话，可能会比较熟悉他。
Recently, he's been putting his videos online.
最近呢，这个这个人他一直在那个网络上分享他的视频，
And he's gone viral on YouTube a few times.
还有很多的，就是人就是去 follow 他的视频。
This picture is a video of his where he was a guest with Logan Paul.
这个就是你在现在看到的这个照片，就是可以他在他的 YouTube 视频里面分享的一个照片。
Who's the guy who fought Mike Tyson? He's the guy who fought Mike Tyson.
OK， 这个属于拳击的一个人，就是跟泰森打过拳击。
And when he shares the gospel with Logan Paul,
当他跟他分享这个神的这个福音的时候，
4 million people have watched.
有400万人在看那一段的视频。
So watching some of these videos helped Pierre start just choosing whether or not he wanted to follow Jesus.
所以皮埃尔这个人呢，他一直在看Kate 的这个 YouTube 上的视频，让他慢慢的就是会思考，我是不是真的要选择跟随耶稣。
One day, me and Pierre were talking with another student, and he told that student, I know I'm going to heaven because Jesus has saved me and fully redeemed me.
我有一天，我刚好听到皮埃尔在跟另外一个学生说这句话，他说：“我知道我将来是要进天堂的，因为我已经选择就是耶稣基督是我的主。”
Whether it was bringing Pierre into an opportunity where he could meet Matthew,
我想说的是，就是真正能够带领皮埃尔，就是经历这些东西，直到他信主当中的
answering his questions through Cliff Kneckley.
也有这个在 YouTube 上这个 Cliff 他分享的一些视频，在做工。
Or teaching Matt and Cliff and so many other people how to share the gospel.
对，就是教导像 Matthew、像 Pierre 这样的人，怎么样的去就是跟随福音。
As well as bringing each of those people to know him know Jesus in a personal way.
并且带领很多像他们这样的人，能够认识耶稣，来到主的面前。
God intervened and changed Pierre's story.
神一直都是在做工的，在介入当中，然后改变了人的这个故事。
If you're a believer, I want to encourage you to think through the miracles that brought you to know Jesus.
我想，如果你是相信，就是信已经是基督徒了，我相信你也是有你自己的这个实际的出现，就是怎么样让你来相信耶稣。
There may be some you don't even know about.
也有可能你们当中有一些你还没有相信的人。
And if you're not a believer, go ahead.
如果你还没有信
Being
耶稣的话，
being here could be that miracle.
你今天能够来到这里，就已经是一个神迹了。
In every adoption story, God intervenes and changes the story.
每一个就是领养的这个故事，神都会介入、会做工，然后改变这个故事的这个结局。
The last step in the adoption story is a transformation and a new identity. The last step in the adoption story is I jumped to the last point. Yeah.
OK， 所以我现在想分享的第三点就是最后一点，就是说，当我们被领养、收养以后呢，我们自己会有一个全新的身份。
Let's look at Moses' story again.
现在还是从摩西来讲起。
In Exodus 2, starting in verse 6, says, "She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said.
然后在出埃及记2章6节这里讲到，法老的女儿打开篮子，看到孩子，怜悯他，说这是希伯来人的孩子。
Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?"
结果那孩子的姐姐对法老的女儿说：“我去给你请个奶妈来为这个孩子哺乳，怎么样呢？”
"Yes, go," she said. So the girl went and got the baby's mother.
法老的女儿就说：“你去吧。”于是那个少女呢就去请了孩子的母亲来。
Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him.
法老的女儿对他说：“你把这孩子抱去为我哺乳，我会给你工钱。”
When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water."
后来这个孩子渐渐的长大以后呢，他就把他带到法老的女儿那里，他变成了法老的女儿的儿子，还给他起名叫摩西。
Moses goes from being the son of a slave doomed to die to being the son of Pharaoh's daughter.
我们看到摩西的身份的转变，他从一个奴隶的儿子变成了一个法老的女儿的儿子。
Don't miss this. She's the one who names him.
千万不要错过这一点，是法老的女儿给他起的名字。
She's the one who raises him.
他也是这个就是让摩西长大的。
And Moses' identity is forever changed.
正是因为这样，摩西的身份就完全改变了。
There's a transformation and a new identity for Moses.
这对摩西来说是一个巨大的改变，他拥有一个新的身份。
There's a transformation and a new identity for Zaya as well.
对我的小儿子 Zaya 来说，他也是有一个身份的改变。
Zaya was originally known as Akshat,
Zaya 他原来的名字是叫 Action，
which means unharmed.
就是这个 Action 的意思呢，是表示没有伤害的意思。
When we adopted him, we named him Haziah Zahir Walden.
我们收养他的时候呢，我把他的名字改成了 Haziah。
Haziah means God sees.
Haziah 是表示上帝看见。
Zahir, we wanted a name that was typical for Calcutta, and it means to shine.
它中间的那个 middle name 叫
Zahir, yeah.
Zahir 呢，是因为他是在加尔各答被领养的，然后加尔各答在那个地方有孩子们有这样的一个经常被用的这个名字，它的意思是闪耀的意思。
We named him Haziah because we believe God saw him when he was alone.
我们给他起名叫 Isaiah，因为我们相信就是神看到了他，
And continues to see him no matter where he is.
并且会一直的看顾他。
And then his last name is Walden,
他的姓就变成 Walden 了，
which means that he is a part of our family.
表示他以后都会是我们家的一员。
We are going to raise him and care for him.
我和太太我们会一直的教养他，会关爱他，
And he has a place with us.
然后他会一直跟我们在一起。
These documents, the one with the yellow background, is the first piece of mail he received with his new name.
你们在这个照片上你看到的就是当时他的那个身份那个证件。
And then the other one with the paperclip is a document that I found that says, Akshat is now known as Haziah Zahir
另外
Walden.
一个文件上你们可以看到，就是当时我们准备要领养成功的时候，这个文件上面说 Aksha 他原来的名字，现在改成叫 Isaiah 了。
There's a transformation and a new identity for Zahir.
他的身份从此就不同了，有改变。
And in our spiritual adoption stories, there's a transformation and a new identity.
所以我们在这个灵里的这个领养被收养的时候，我们的身份其实也有了一个改变。
In Galatians 4:3 through 5, we see this. Okay. It says, So also, when we were underage, we were in slavery until the elemental spiritual forces of the world. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law.
在加拉太书第4章说，我说那承受产业的，虽然是权业的主人，但为孩童的时候却与奴仆毫无分别。
To redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship.
要把是及至时候满足，神就差遣他的儿子为女子所生在律法以下，要把律法以下的人赎出来。
In Galatians 4, starting in 3, we see that we start as slaves to the world, separated from God.
在加拉太书第4章中，我们讲到，我们在孩童的时候是受管于世俗的之下。
God intervenes, sends Jesus to live a perfect life, and sacrifice himself to do what we couldn't.
可是因为神的介入呢，他差派了耶稣基督来到我们当中。耶稣基督他是有一个完美的人生。
And we become sons and daughters of him.
因为耶稣基督的救赎，我们呢就能够成为神的儿女。
There's a transformation and a new identity in our spiritual adoptions.
我们有了一个新的身份，通过这个灵里的领养。
In John 14:18 it says, I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you.
约翰福音14章18节说：“我不体善你们为孤儿，我必到你们这里来。”
God intervenes to bring us a new identity in him.
神因为神的介入，让我们有一个全新的身份。
So what does it mean to be adopted by God?
那么被神收养是什么意义呢？
I think it very closely parallels what it means for Uzziah to be adopted by Liana and I.
我觉得从很多层面上，他与我和林安娜收养的Isaiah是很相似的。
God provides for every need we have
神会供应我们的一切，
abundantly.
非常丰盛的。
God raises us to be more like him.
神也让我们能够更加像他的样式。
He gives us compassion and love and sometimes discipline.
神也把这种怜悯、爱放在我们的心中，很多时候他也让我们有自律。
I firmly believe that when we have things we're excited about and celebrate, He is celebrating with us.
我相信，我真的非常的相信，当我们有一些事情我们要就是庆祝、祝贺的时候，神也是跟我们同在的，他也为我们喜悦。
And I also believe that when we are in mourning, frustrated by the brokenness of the world, He is right there mourning with us.
我也相信，当我们灰心、沮丧、失败的时候，我们在哭泣的时候，神也是与我们同悲的。
He is there with us, comforting and weeping.
他一直都跟我们在一起，他带给我们安慰，也与我们同哭。
We can approach Him easily. We can approach Him easily.
我们能够非常容易的去靠近神，接近他。
There was a pastor in Manhattan named Tim Keller. Yeah. There was a pastor in Manhattan named Tim Keller.
在曼哈顿呢，有一位牧师，他的名字叫 Tim Keller。
He would say, "There's only one person in the castle who is willing to wake up the king in the middle of the night for a glass of water."
他说了这样一句话：在整个城堡当中，唯一一个能够在晚上凌晨3点钟去叫醒国王，为他要一杯水的人，
It's his child.
就是这个国王的孩子。
We have that kind of access.
我们与上帝之间其实就是有这样同样的一种接近他的这样的权利。
If you aren't adopted yet, I want to tell you that God wants you to be in His family.
我想要跟你们分享今天的这个，就是想要告诉你们，神是希望我们成为他家里的一员的。
You are missing this, but it is available to you.
如果你还没有成为神的家里的成员的时候，你要知道这个权利是他给你的。
And if you are like me, you have been adopted, but you forget.
如果你像我的话，即便我们已经就是被神领养了，成为他的孩子，但是还常常会忘记。
We forget we have the access, and we forget that God looks at us like a son or a daughter.
我们常常会忘记，我们真的是可以去到父那里，我们也是他的儿女。
I hope that this reminds you that we can celebrate that.
我希望透过今天的这个分享，让你能够提醒你，我们是真的是可以为我们跟神之间的这样的关系来庆祝。
God loves you, and He earnestly wants to adopt you into His family. He gave.
神非常的爱你，他也是非常的希望能够领养你成为他的家里的一员。
He gave everything to make it happen.
他愿意做任何的事情，让你成为他的家人。
And this truth changes everything.
这个真理，它会改变一切事物。
Thank you guys so much for having me.